He found a staircase in the lake. It still goes up. He did not see the staircase until the wind laid the lake down flat, a high mountain stillness that came like a held breath. It was late afternoon on Fontana Lake in western North Carolina, where drowned hills wear water like a borrowed coat, and the concrete dam throws a cold shadow that teaches you to look twice. The drought had been long, stingy, the kind that draws shoreline back like a tide that lost faith. Ansel Rook, 39, a surveyor who liked boats better than offices, let his rented skiff idle and watched the pale slope of silt with its driftwood teeth. Then the light tipped, and a line of gray stone showed under the green, not random at all, steps as even as counted breaths, leading up from water toward nothing that should exist. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? That October, 2022, the Smokies stood sharp against a sky the color of rinsed linen. The air smelled of leaf duff and gasoline and the faraway tang of rain that was always a rumor this year and rarely a fact. Ansel had driven out from Bryson City after lunch with a paper cup of coffee and a coil of measuring tape because the county had asked for photos of exposed foundations along the North Shore. The maps they kept were honest but out of date, and the lake was telling different stories every week. He wore a windbreaker the color of old blueberries, a hat with a frayed bill, and the face of a man who does not mind being alone if the work has edges. He cut the motor and drifted. The steps began in green water, a little deeper than a tall man's reach, the lake clear enough in that pocket to show the top 3 treads before light blurred into bottle glass. They continued above the surface, slick with algae at the line where water had been yesterday, then dry, then dusty, another dozen risers marching toward a slash of bank where saplings clawed at loose dirt. There was no porch, no house, no landing where a hand might reach for a knob, just a staircase that went up and then kept going as if the air were a hallway no one had told it how to be. Ansel nosed the bow toward the steps and let the skiff kiss the lowest dry riser. The hull made a hollow sound he heard in his knees. He stood, tested his balance, and stepped onto the first stone. It held. He took another. The risers were a hair shorter than modern code, built for legs from a different century. He climbed 10, then 11, then 12, a little more than a story, in a house that had learned to take weather as a sermon. He stopped where the steps met an absence and laid his hand on the sidewall that ran up either side like bones. Mortared fieldstone, careful work, the kind that starts with winter in mind. He looked back. The lake held his boat like a hand holds a toy. The dam stood off to the west, all angles and utility, its face unreadable. A loon called once far out, the syllable slanted and old. The stare made no answer, and that felt like an answer. He took out his phone. No signal, which is how stories get their chances. He knelt and ran his fingers over scrape marks in the treads where feet had once taught stone to be polite. He brushed silt from a riser with the cuff of his jacket and uncovered a line of letters someone had cut with a chisel and a spare hour. Willow Gap. The name felt right in the mouth. The steps had belonged to a place on a hillside that no longer agreed to exist. A truck rumbled on the scenic road above the tree line, then faded. Ansel stood. He is not a dramatic man, not a man who says the word haunted when the word history will do, but he felt a little movement in his scalp when his boot tried the next tread up and met nothing it could trust. He lifted his foot and set it again, and the soul found purchase on air as if stone continued in a material too stubborn for his eyes. He could feel something there, a resistance like the way a field of grass resists when you try to step through a place where deer have passed and the stems remember. He pressed. His weight held. He let it go and stepped back, heart knocking once, but not twice. He stood on the stair where real ended and whatever else began. The lake lapped below, measuring the hull against rock. A red maple leaf came down with dignity, landed on the 7th riser, and considered the long work of becoming loam. Ansel took a breath. He is a man who trusts second looks. He took one. The lake belonged to a body of stories people in Bryson City tell clean over pie. When the Tennessee Valley Authority flooded the valley to build the dam in the early 1940s, the town of Proctor had to move. Houses went down to foundations, barns left prints in the earth like giant hands, cemeteries were dug up with care and moved with ceremony, and some say not everything went where it should. On low years, people found stairs and walls, school steps, a chimney with a name carved into a corner stone. On foolish years, people tried to steal the past, and the mud stole them instead. The county kept a list of places not to be brave. Ansel is not brave. He is patient. He walked back down to the skiff and dug out the coil of tape, a pencil, a stack of flagging ribbon. He thought of calling the park office and decided instead to take his measurements first and be useful with facts. He worked the way surveyors work, lengths and levels, muttering figures under his breath in a rhythm that kept the mind from dramatizing. He wrote Willow Gap on a page and underlined it softly with the pencil because the stone had asked. He measured tread depth, rise, total run to the bank, distance to the current water line, the angle of the bank above the last step. While he worked, a wind came from the east and pushed the surface into a skin. The steps looked less sure then. He set a small cloth bag at the foot of the first dry riser, full of pebbles and a coil of bright ribbon, because people in the mountains know that small offerings are not foolish if they help you think straight. Halfway through, he heard a bicycle bell, clear, bright, a single ring. He straightened. The sound did not belong to a road. It had the roundness of a thing sounded in an open room. He turned his head the way animals do when they want to aim an ear. The bell came again, faint, then a child's voice without words, the way children announce themselves to their own day. The air held it and gave it back. Then nothing. He called out a simple hello. The sound folded into the trees and did not return. He is not the kind of man who says names into a lake, so he went back to his numbers and let the bell be a sound that remembered and moved on. At sunset, he drove back to town. He did not mention the staircase at the diner because new stories grow better if you give them a night to decide their shape. He took his notes to the tiny desk in his rental and drew the thing. He wrote in the margin a line that was not part of any job he had ever been paid to do. The stair goes up past stone. The next morning, the lake wore a fog that fell in slow exhalations from the coves. He put the skiff in early, coffee in a thermos that had learned to keep secrets. The staircase waited. He climbed to the place where his boot had found air the day before. He lifted his foot and pressed again and met the same soft resistance, like cloth pulled tight across a doorway. The fog gathered and thinned. The lake stretched one slow muscle. He set his palm out where a banister would be if someone had considered such things. His fingers tingled with the small current that passes through the body at the exact moment a man tells himself he will try something and believes himself. He raised his knee and stepped onto what was not there. The foot held. He set the other. He stood an inch above the last stone and felt a dizzy smile crawl across his face as if he had been younger once and forgotten how to be. He took another. The air had weight where the step ought to be. He felt it through the rubber of his boot, a density that said, I am not stone and I am not stone. He climbed 3 steps in air and stopped because he is not brave. Breath is a kind of data. He took it in. The fog thinned. The stair under nothing led to a landing that the mind made, whether or not the world did. He imagined a door where the sky was, just to see if the imagination would draw a knob. It did not. He stepped back, down onto the good stone, and laughed once, quietly, pointedly, the way you tell yourself you are still a person whose days have jobs in them. On the 3rd day, he brought someone. Ansel is careful about who he invites into something he cannot name. He called Lucienne Pike, 61, who ran the little historical society in town with the energy of a river in March. She wore a quilted vest and a wool cap and the kind of boots women earn by living here. She brought pastries because facts get hungry and people are nicer when their hands are busy. She listened while he told it. She did not interrupt. She asked one question with her head tilted like a dog hearing a violin. Does it go up? It goes up, he said. They went out together. The skiff felt lightly ridiculous under the weight of their care. The morning did the few small things it always does before it remembers it is in charge. The staircase was there, gray in the light, patient as a broom left leaning against a wall you forgot to keep. Lucienne reached the second riser and stopped, and with an odd humility, put her palm to the wall so the stone might recognize her. She climbed to the place where Air had learned a job. He watched her foot commit and hold. She gave him a look he will carry to his last morning. It had the quiet of a person who has been right about something important or wrong about something important and is making room for either result. She climbed one more and stopped. She did not push. She is not greedy. She came back down. Back in town, she made them tea in the society's office, which smelled of paper and lemon oil. She opened a ledger that had belonged to a church over the ridge that no longer stood. She turned pages until the binding sighed and laid flat, and then she tapped a finger next to a line written in a hand that had cared very much about straightness. Willow Gap Homestead, Brysonside. Stair and porch built by M. Garvey, 1931. Stepstones gifted by Applin sisters. She traced the names like a kind of blessing. People give names so the ground will keep them without bitterness, she said. Ansel told her about the bicycle bell, about the child voice that had no words. She nodded once, an economy that could hold an encyclopedia behind it. They found a photo in a folder of houses drowned to make the dam, a woman in a light summer dress halfway up a stair with a baby at her hip, and a boy of about 6 sitting on the landing with a tin pail, watching the photographer with straight seriousness. The steps were the same, the wall the same, the angle of the hillside the same, the lake not yet there to argue. Lucienne tapped a pencil against the margin of the picture and said the thing that opened the room. My grandmother told me she saw the army men come to measure in 38. She said a man from Willow Gap told them he would build his stair to the sky if it meant the water would have to think twice. She said he whistled while he worked, and his boy rode a bicycle so fast it learned the curve of the road and kept taking it when the road turned into a path and the path turned into a trail and the trail turned into someone's memory of a trail. She smiled with one side of her face. I think you found where the whistling goes. That night, Ansel dreamed slow water and a boy's bell moving away just fast enough to be allowed. He woke before dawn with rain, finally practicing its lines on the roof. He left the boat on the trailer and took the road along the river to the dam because seeing the thing that made the change is sometimes a cure. The dam looked itself, muscle and worry. Men in hard hats waved the way men wave when their hands are busy with ladders and they still have manners. The sky had put its gray coat back on. The rain lasted 2 full days. The third day broke open into a light that could make a shuttered room reconsider. He took the skiff out at noon. The lake had risen a hand's width and drawn a green lip on the lower steps. He climbed again. The air steps remained, not drowned by a little more water, not meek. He stood on the third invisible tread and spoke toward the place where a door might be. Not loudly, not foolishly. Hello, he said. Then, because the air had made him braver than he ought to be, he added, I can bring your names back to where people can see them. The lake answered the way lakes answer, by being present with everything around them without offering comment. He sat on the 4th stone step and ate the pastry Lucienne had tucked into his pocket as if she had known he would forget to eat. He tried the air with his palm again and felt, for just a fraction of heart rhythm, a shape moved across it that was not his hand at all. The story traveled the way stories travel when they are useful. Not online, not yet. In town, over paper cups, in line at the post office, at the walk-in barber with the fish calendar 3 years behind. People gave him their versions. A woman who remembered a man who remembered seeing a parade of porches floating like rafts past the bend when the first flood came. An old man with a face like a woodcut who said he used to fish off a stone stair when his father was alive, and that if you whistled the tune that man used, you could make the bobber nod. A teacher who had kept a box of rail spikes and marbles found on low years and said she would clean them and bring them by the society office so Lucienne could have them or pretend not to want them like she always did. In late October, with 2 hard frosts behind them, the county asked Ansel to guide a ranger and a structural engineer to the site. They went out in a John boat that carried its own echo. The ranger was a woman named Haynes who wore the park's green like a promise and carried the weight of a radio the way people carry their father's ideas. The engineer was a man with a gentle way of touching old things before speaking ill of them. They stood on the fifth stone step and looked up the ladder of air and did not mock it. The ranger wrote in a book. The engineer crouched and set a level on the second tread and laughed once softly when the bubble centered itself as if the past knew about precision. Haynes asked the question, stories have to survive. Is it dangerous? Ansel shrugged in a way that held 3 chapters. It is dangerous the way memory is dangerous, he said. It makes people want to keep climbing. It is dangerous the way stairs are when you forget you have a body with limits. It is not dangerous the way an alligator is or a bar fight. They set 3 stakes in the bank and tied flagging ribbon between, a line that told people who had to approach that someone else had been wise before them. Haynes asked for a sign, the simple kind that reads caution and does not attempt poetry. Ansel offered to come and keep an eye some afternoons when he had work nearby. She wrote his cell number in her book and tucked the pencil behind her ear in a way his mother would have liked. In early November, a fog rolled in low and forgot to leave. The lake became a page erased and written over, erased again. School buses turned their lights on at noon. The mountain that wears the dam as a decoration hid its fine line. Ansel kept away because the fog makes men do things they forgive themselves for later, and a man ought to reduce his opportunities for forgiveness if he can. On the first clear morning after, he went out early and found 2 objects on the 4th stone step that could not have gotten there by falling. A bicycle bell, rusted but round, the striker frozen in a kind of kindness, and a tin pail, the exact wrong size for anything useful, dented where a boy might have clapped it to make the sound bigger. He touched neither. He sat down. He greeted them with his breath in line, the way you greet animals that have decided to be near you. At 10, Lucien arrived with a thermos and 2 paper cups and the sort of force field that keeps good men from doing dumb things for no reason. She looked at the bell and the pail and did not pretend not to see them. She took photos that did not flatter the light and said the names in the ledger once. Lowe, Garvey, Applin, Willow Gap. She did not say a boy, she did not say a child. She put her hand on the sidewall and looked up the line of air with the plain candor of someone who has shored up more shelves than emotions and understands both. You can coax a story, she said, but not yank it. Take the bell to town. Leave the pail here for another day. We will see what the lake thinks of compromise. He took the bell gently, wrapped it in a handkerchief he had never found much use for before, and pocketed it like a chosen stone. Back at the office, Lucien set it next to a photograph and a typed card. Bicycle bell recovered from Willow Gap Stair, fall of 22, likely pre-flood artifact. On the card, a second line in pencil for people who read too fast. The stair goes up. In the second week of December, with the mountains blue as a bruise and the wind deciding to be cruel to make up for lost time, Ansel went out one last day before the holidays. He brought a crowbar because he had promised himself he would not bring a crowbar until the story invited one. He did not need it. The pail had sat, then vanished, then returned, then sat again with a rock in it a little smaller than a fist. He took the rock out and saw in the bottom of the pail, scratched by some patient hand or the work of a nail held at an angle, 3 words. Open in summer. He laughed out loud then. So loudly, a pair of ducks took off in a panic and told other ducks about him for an hour. He looked up at the sky, which had forgotten him to tend to larger business. He put the pail back on the step. He told it, with what dignity he could muster, that he would. Winter happened the way winter happens down there. One day, the lake wore a shell of rime like a dare. The next day, it rained hard as coins. Ansel worked a road job in the next county and came home tired to soup and a radio with the news that would not stop wishing it were better. He sent Lucien postcards from 2 counties over with sketches of culverts no one needed, and she mailed him back photocopies of ledger pages with red pencil underlines that made more sense than his own arrows. By late June, the water had climbed enough to lick at the 3rd riser and cover the 1st. The air above the invisible steps still felt like fabric pulled tight by a careful hand. School let out, and visitors came with coolers and the need to float and forget. Haynes put the sign back up twice. Ansel sat on the eighth stone step more than once and told people kindly that there was nothing up there for them unless they had time to spare and patience to listen. A few listened, most did not. No one fell, which felt like a policy. On a hot Monday, when thunderheads built tall and polite to the south and forgot to arrive, he took the pail and set it in his lap and used the crowbar not as a pry, but as a weight. He eased the thin tin sides apart where they had been pinched back over the lip like a secret. Inside, he found folded oilcloth, soft as a worn glove. Inside that, a photograph no larger than his palm, and a strip of paper with a line that looked like a prayer until he read it, and it felt like a list. The photograph showed the stair as it had been before the lake, the woman in summer dress and the baby at her hip, and the boy with the pail, sitting with a seriousness that has no word in English. The man who must be M. Garvey stood 2 steps down, hat in hand, as if introducing the stairs to whoever had the camera. Behind them, the ridge wore its trees in a confidence the mountains teach. On the back, in careful letters, someone had written, "So you remember how we looked when the water was a rumor." The strip of paper held one long sentence. When they came with clipboards, he whistled the tune about willow leaves and said he'd build the stair to the sky because steps are a kind of truth and the water would have to climb over the truth if it wanted to drown the house. There were names then, 3, the kind that drop out of families and get picked up by strangers who treat them right. He folded the strip back into the oilcloth and put all of it into the pail and set it on the step because the story belonged to the stair more than it belonged to him. In August, a lightning storm chewed on the dam and left it as it had found it. In September, a girl with a blue braid and a polka dot dress climbed the real stone steps and stood at the place where air did its work and played a penny whistle softly, 3 notes, and then a run. Her grandmother sat on the second step and wiped her cheeks with a tissue she pretended was for sweat. Lucienne watched from the bank with a composure she had purchased fairly over years of deciding when to speak and when to file. Haynes wrote a note in her book that read in an unsentimental hand, "Leave space here." The last time Ansel went before the rains came back for real, he climbed onto the 3rd invisible tread and set his palm out at the height of a child's head. He did not feel breath. He felt pressure. A small, exact pressure like the world confirming a measurement you would have sworn was off by just enough to drive you mad. He closed his eyes and saw the boy on the landing with the pail and the bell. He saw a woman take the last 2 steps at a practical pace, baby on hip. He saw a man look out at a hillside that had just become a lake and refuse to let the stair be anything but stairs. He opened his eyes, and the lake went on being a lake. There is not a larger lesson he can give you from this, except the one he wrote in the margin of his notebook after the 2nd week, a sentence he did not quite understand then and understands in the small of his back now. Not everything drowned. Some things learn to keep their shape in the air and wait for your foot. If you go to Fontana when the water is down and the wind minds its manners, you can find the stair if you ask the right person and you promise not to hurry. It will be there the way durable things are there, honest about their age, unwilling to entertain your stunts. You can put your boot on the 3rd step and feel something that does not owe you an explanation hold you anyway. You can look up at the sky and decide there is a door or decide there isn't, and the stair will permit either decision. You can listen for a bicycle bell and you may hear a loon instead, and that will be enough. If you tell the story afterward, tell it the way lakes prefer, with pauses, with dates spoken out loud so the years remember they are not just numbers, with names because names weigh the right things down. Say Willow Gap, say Garvey, say Applin, say a boy, though the paper does not give him to you. Say a woman moving with a baby on her hip and a list in her head and a refusal to shame the stairs with panic. Say a man who whistled a leaf tune and believed in steps the way people believe in scripture, not as decoration, but as an instruction on how to move the body when the body wants to quit. And if you find yourself on a day when the wind drops and the water stills, and you are offered the choice to test a step that does not belong to stone, ask your breath first. Make it even. Set your palm where a rail would be. Put your weight down like a promise. If it holds, climb one and stop. The air prefers people who do not need to conquer it to feel tall. Leave something small on the 5th step. A ribbon, a marble, A bell that waited in a drawer too long. Walk back down and let the day close the drawer. The stair will keep going up whether you are there to witness the miracle of plain persistence or not. That is how some things survive the flood. They decide to be their own house. They decide to be the part of the house you cannot drown. Her phone pinged at a grave with her name. The notification bloomed on her screen the moment her shoes left the gravel and slid onto the soft path between moss-dark stones. A small bell chime, bright as glass. A banner at the top. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. The words sat there as calmly as a weather app, as if the city had decided to label her the way it labels a bridge or a square. The place was Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. Spanish moss hung in long, steady sentences from the live oaks. The river kept its secrets behind the bluff and breathed like a sleeping room. It was late afternoon on a Sunday in early November, the air cool enough to make her wish for sleeves and warm enough to forgive her for forgetting them. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Edeni Hale, 28. She worked in visitor services at a small maritime museum upriver, the kind of job that made her memorize the angles of ships and the dates when storms came ashore. She liked fonts and quiet, and the sound salt makes drying on stone. She was visiting Bonaventure because her friend Anson had flown in from Minneapolis for a long weekend, and the two of them liked places that let you feel your breath in your mouth. The year was 2021. Phones knew where you were within decent intimacy. Some headstones wore small plaques with codes that asked to be scanned and promised a story. They had parked on Bonaventure Road under an oak that had learned to be older than most houses. The sky was simple, a clean coin of light. The volunteer at the office had given them a paper map and a soft-voiced list of locations worth the walk if you wanted your day to hold. Look for the little angels facing east. Find the section where the camellias keep blooming against instruction. There's a family plot that feels like a room you shouldn't step into without knocking. No one mentioned a notification. Edeni stared at her phone. The banner did not give a location like Section F or Plot 31. It was the same tag her calendar used when she arrived at work or home. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. As if she were a place. As if the grave were her. Anson leaned toward the screen and squinted. He was tall and light-footed, a teacher of high school literature who carried poems in his pockets like receipts. He read the banner and then her face and made a small arranging motion with his hands, the way he does when he wants to place humor where fright is trying to sit. That's a bug, he said, not unkindly. Or a geofence you made and forgot. Did you tell your phone to remind you to be yourself today? She clicked the banner to see where the phone thought she belonged. A map opened, a blue dot pulsed with the steady patience of a small heartbeat. A gray pin sat 100 feet east in a section labeled McAllister. The pop-up bubble above the pin read Edeni Hale in the same unsentimental font. She did not have a virtual contact called a cemetery. She had not created a reminder to arrive at her own name. The phone had decided the path curled between stones with dates that made you speak them out loud, because numbers are easier to hold when they come through the mouth. 1873, 1920, 2009. The Oaks leaned as if sold on the idea that the living need rehearsal space. Anson spoke a tour fact about a poet who loved this place and whose plaque visitors touch in a small, quick superstition. Edeni nodded because liking facts is a way of staying steady. Her pocket shook again. Another chime, the same banner. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. She breathed the way the yoga teacher on the internet tells you to. In through a count of 4, hold for 4, out for 6. They followed the path east until the bluff opened its shoulder and let the wind test their sleeves. The section ahead was a little higher, a little more sure of itself. A plot enclosed by low stone, dressed in ivy, sat beneath a live oak that looked like a table that had decided to grow legs. In the center stood a headstone gray as rain, taller than Edeni's shoulder. The name at the top held Edeni Hale. She stopped. You might have stopped too. Her name was not common. Her mother had found it in a book of Old English names and liked the way it sounded like a promise made under a tree. She had never met another Edeni. To see the letters in this order on stone felt like stepping into a movie where you have lines you did not audition for. Anson's hand found her elbow without a show of it. He had the sense not to say, wow, or are you kidding? He stood with her and let the river finish a sentence neither of them had started. The dates carved below the name were the first clean relief, 1974 to 2014, not hers. A woman 2 decades older, gone 7 years now. Under the dates, a line that read as Keeper of the Keys. The stone carried a small oval of glazed photo, a face with hair tucked back, eyes steady, a glint of a key ring at the edge of the frame. The oval was rubbed to a shine from fingers, the way love polishes small things while refusing to say it is love. On the right-hand corner of the stone, someone had bolted one of the new plaques with its little square of patterns. Scan to learn more. People who love story cannot resist a square that holds one. Ideni lifted her phone and let the camera see. A link opened without asking for anything. A page built by a memorial service company bloomed. At the top, the name again. Below, a small biography. A life lived with habits, upright and kind. A childhood in Chatham County, a long run as cemetery sexton. The last line read in a voice that felt like a woman sitting on a step with a mug and a warning and a grin. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. While she read, the phone hummed again. Not a banner this time. A little circle pulsing at the top of the screen, the way maps announce a place with enthusiasm. The circle flashed once, then settled. Ideni swiped down to see the source, a calendar reminder with no category. White, titled simply, Arrived. Location, here. She had not written that. The phone, perhaps, had decided the day needed a label, or the small plaque had more to it than the page admitted. Anson said the woman in the photo had librarian eyes. He meant that as a compliment. He pointed at the key ring. He said his grandmother had been a keeper of the keys at a church in North Dakota, and those women know where every grief sits at every hour, the way a night janitor knows which chairs spit gum and which ones sigh. They stood a while. People walked past in respectful silence, guided by a docent's voice that held just enough theater to keep 15 people from wandering into their own daydreams. Spanish moss moved like thought repeating itself. A flake of light rose off the river and fell back as if it had changed its mind about being air. It would have been a good story already finding your own name on stone, a phone that had the audacity to tell you you had arrived, but something else decided to be true. A little tone sounded from the phone, the way sounds do when an app you forgot you had decides to help. It was the noise her AirDrop made when someone nearby wanted to share a photo at inopportune moments. The screen shifted to a dialogue. A file offered to send itself to her. The sender name was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. The file name read Keys. Anson leaned in and made his face calm. Decline, he said gently, because strangers in public places with quick hands make tricks, and both of them work in museums and have seen every version of the human habit of testing boundaries. She hovered. Decline would be wise. Accept would be a dare. She pressed accept because sometimes you let stories finish what they start. The file downloaded. It was not a photo. It was an audio file, a minute 42 in length. The waveform showed it wasn't silence. She tilted the phone toward her own ear instead of speaker because you don't open a voice in a cemetery loud unless the voice has earned the right. Static first, then the sound of wind combing something thin, then a woman's voice, the age of a woman, who tells tools where they belong and expects cooperation. The voice said, dry as a towel and warm as a summer kitchen. If you are standing over me, child, and your name is mine, you can help me keep my promises. Put your phone on the stone and leave it be a minute. It will tell you where to stand next. Anson's eyebrows did a small jazz riff and then tried to behave. Okay, he said softly, a word that meant, I am here and I am not going to ruin this with cleverness. Ideni set the phone on the flat top of the headstone the way the voice had instructed. The screen slid into its lock. Her reflection replaced her. The oval photo looked past her shoulder the way old photos always do. She counted in her head as a way to keep the childish fear of being tricked from standing up and knocking the ritual with its elbow. 50, 60, 78. The phone buzzed once, she lifted it. The map opened of its own accord. The blue dot had moved nothing. The gray pin had changed. It labeled another grave 30 yards north with a name neither of them had seen on the paper map. Rosin Hale. A second name. Another Hale. The first name was Welsh and not common here. They went because the day had asked enough times to be answered polite. The second stone stood lower, more modest. The granite, a color you could never find on purpose if you looked in a catalog. The dates were older, 1931 to 1999. The epitaph read, "She kept the gate lighted," and under that, in smaller letters, so faint you could only see them when the cloud put its hand over the sun, a line, Rosine was born. Rosine Idris. She married into Hale and stayed. Tell my niece if she comes through here that I see her when I count keys. I am not anybody's niece, Idris said aloud, and then took a breath because she heard the defensiveness squirreled underneath. I mean, not hers. You might be more people's niece than you know, Anson said gently, a man who had grown up with uncles who weren't uncles and yet were more family than the kind that wears your face. They stood while the wind added a signature to the bottom of the page of the day. The river put its shoulder against the bank and leaned. The phone did not ping again for a while. A cardinal went from one branch to another with the purposeful speed of a person who knows where the parts are stored. A group of teenagers trailed an auntie through the lanes, popping gum in a respectful way, which is a regional miracle. Idony looked up Rosin on the cemetery's database because when your heart gets odd, facts make a braid to hold on to. The database was one of those volunteer-built websites that carry the tone of a potluck where everyone brings a dish so exact it shames you for choosing salad. Rosin's entry was thorough. Born Rhonda Valley, came across with parents as a child, settled in Chatham County, married one Mr. Hale, worked checklist after checklist for the electrical union office, sang alto in church with the patience of an anvil, survived by no children, preceded by older brothers, all gone. Niece mentioned in an obituary in 1999 with no name given. Anson made a sound that meant the story had wiped its hands on his shirt and was ready to cook. The phone chimed once more, now with the tone her museum app uses when a beacon in an exhibit hands you a fact. She had turned beacons off last month because being interrupted by history while in history felt a bit like a stage whisper in a quiet theater. She had not turned beacons back on. The screen read, "A note is waiting." A map pinpointed the little brick building the cemetery uses as a workshop for the grounds crew. A path drew itself in blue between the Hales and the shop, like a string in a child's game. They went because keys that ask to be found deserve not to rust. The door to the shop was propped with a cinder block the way doors are propped everywhere when the weather learns to be useful. A radio played a station that chose old soul and occasional baseball score updates. No one was at the counter. A bell stood there anyway, the kind that rings a sound like a glass penny. Anson rang it because he likes participating in obvious rituals. A man in his 50s with a badge that read August came in from the back, wiping his hands on a rag that had earned its keep. "You folks need a map?" he asked, then took a longer look at their faces and revised. "Or a minute." "We were by the Hale Stones," Idony said, and watched the way a man looks when a rhyme finds his ear and tells him it cares. August nodded. "Course you were," he said. "I keep an envelope for that family. Been waiting on who it's waiting on." He reached under the counter, where drawers have learned to hold what should not be lost, and brought up a large yellow envelope with a blue paperclip that had rusted a little by choosing weather. The envelope had 3 words on the front in tidy block letters. For the next Idony, heat went across her face like an honest light. August saw it and stilled. He handed her the envelope the way people hand one another babies, meaning well and moving slow. She opened it with her thumb. Inside, 3 items. A small brass key, old, not ornate, with teeth filed like a decision. A folded sheet torn from a spiral notebook, edges soft with years. And a wallet-sized photo of a woman in a blue work shirt with a name patch and a grin you could feel in your back like afternoon Sunday. The patch read, I Donny. The face belonged to the woman on the first stone. The note was written in blue ballpoint in a hand that pressed harder than paper deserves. It read, simple. For the next Idani in this county who can hear me the way a key hears a lock, my niece is out there. She won't say yes to the word niece because words are stubborn. She'll need to open the box in the old mausoleum we keep for tools and favors. The key is for the small door on the left. Lift on the latch while you turn. The box has what belongs to her and me and her grandmother. If she is standing at my stone with a phone, she will know that I know. Don't bring a crowd. Bring one friend who reads instructions with his eyes. Leave the key when you are done. We can count without hands here. I'm not someone's niece, she said again, and heard how the sentence grew less certain with practice. Her mother's family tree began and ended in a different state. A line of women who told polite lies to spare one another the sharp edges and did their grief in broom closets. Her father had not survived long enough to name distant relations. He had left behind a bent screwdriver and a smell that her body still could find when a day asked. Anson's hand found the counter in a quick pat, like checking for keys as you leave the house. You don't have to be a niece to be the person meant to do a thing, he said. But also you might, and it might not matter how that happened. August tapped the counter twice, a habit that sounded like a yes. The small left door, he said. People never see it. Take the path behind the office and go right at the angel with the missing hand. The mausoleum is the little brick one that looks polite. The left door sticks the way a lie sticks to a room. Do what the note said, lift and turn. They went back into the light. The blue string on the map did not bother now to draw. The path knew their feet. The angel with the missing hand stood where the volunteer had said, Angels stand, face east, blank expression, that suggested she had witnessed every century and found nothing quite bad enough to frown at yet. The brick mausoleum waited with that small pride buildings have when they know they are not the grandest on the block, but are the one that does the job without complaint. The left door looked like a panel added later. The brass latch had the smoothness that comes of being touched by people who mean to get work done. Idani slid the key in, the teeth caught, and then thought better of it. She lifted the latch with her other hand and turned. The lock gave. The door opened 6 inches and stopped, ticked by a wooden wedge that had been insinuated at the bottom by someone who had not wanted the door opened by accident or habit. Anson reached down and pulled the wedge free. It had a date burned into it with a soldering iron. 2014. The year on the first stone. Inside was a closet of sorts, pegboards and hooks, a rake missing its second tooth, a coil of twine that had memorized its circle and would not learn a new trick, and on a shelf at eye level, a tin bread box with a domed lid, painted a green faded to the color of river glass. No lock. Written in the same blue hand on a piece of tape was a word. Hail. She lifted the lid like a person lifts lids on boxes that might contain bees or inheritance. Inside, arranged with the blunt care of someone who never made a mess unless a branch fell where it shouldn't, sat 3 items. A narrow ledger with a black cloth spine. A key fob with 3 small brass tags stamped with numbers, and a folded paper bag, the kind grocery stores use for baking flour, rolled tight and rubber banded with an elasticity that made its own sound. She opened the ledger first, because pages are her map. Names, rows of them, dates, locations in the cemetery with check marks where gates had failed and been repaired. Next to some entries, a small star. Those starred names also appeared on the little brass tags. Numbers, not random, not plot numbers, locker numbers. The cemetery kept a bank of lockers for the grounds crew in a shed she had not thought needed one. Her phone chimed in her pocket, a small suggestion from the maps. Direction nudged, left, then right. Then, would you like to add this location to favorites? She ignored the phone. The ledger asked for attention. On the inside back cover of the ledger, a note in different handwriting. Spare for Rosen's niece if she finds it. Locker 12 holds what isn't in the ground. If days are bad, tell the river. The river tells me. The tags on the key fob read 10-12-14. She ran her finger over 12 the way a person does over a scar. She felt nothing supernatural. She felt focus. Anson took the bag at her nod and unwound the rubber band. Inside lay two objects wrapped in butcher paper. He unrolled the first. A locket. Gold. Thin as luck. With a hairline crack. Shaped like lightning. If lightning were careful. Inside, a photograph so tiny it could be breathed away if you weren't paying mind. A baby in a christening gown that had borrowed lace from a curtain. The face pinched in the way newborn faces pinch. On the back, in pencil that had migrated into the paper like a crop planting itself, a name. Rosen Idris Hale. A line below it, for my niece to hold if she comes to hear me. He unrolled the second. A county map from 1968, creased, the paper's fiber gone feathery at the folds. A road circled in blue pencil, a margin note. That old step bridge out by the waterworks. We left something in the middle beam in 74. If you can't find it, it means we didn't need it. If you can, well, you'll know. We are not going to a step bridge at dusk, Anson said. A man who loved old maps and also loved not getting in the paper under the wrong kind of headline. We are going to find Locker 12 while the Museum of the Dead is still on our side. They found the shed. August had seen their faces through the glass and met them halfway with the keys because some stories ask for a witness who knows better than to narrate. He led them to a wall of small metal lockers, each door painted the dull red of a barn that had not given up but had learned to pace itself. He unlocked 12 and stepped back. Inside lay a small stack of shallow boxes, each labeled with a date. The top was the 1, 2014. Under that, 2008. Under that, 1999. Anson lifted the top box and set it on a workbench. He opened it with care. Inside, wrapped in tissue that had become more suggestion than paper, sat a handful of objects that people keep for reasons the living should not pretend to understand quickly. A church key. A photo of 3 women, arms crossed, outside a union hall, one of them with a name patch that read R. Hale, a Polaroid of a red step bridge with water under it purling toward a bend. A handwritten note folded small. The note read, "For the niece who knows the word niece because keys hum when they find their door. You were not an accident. We kept count. We named you all the ways we could. Our names were soft and stubborn. Take what you want, leave the ledger so the ground does not have to work alone." She sat because standing felt rude. She is a woman whose mother did not tell stories with this kind of curve. She gathered the truth like thread. Her mother had been born in this county and left when she was 19, a bus to another state, a man met in a grocery line, a child years later when the idea of staying had become heavy. She did not talk about siblings, claimed not to remember cousins, flinched when the phrase back home came up. The name Hale had come not from romance, but from accident or choice, a name taken because other names insisted on being something else. Rosen Idris had married into Hale, but the family had been built long before that. Keys had been passed with and without rings. August stood with a posture that says, "I will not take your moment away from you." When the radio in the shed shifted to a weather update, he reached and turned it down so the forecast would not interrupt a storm already occurring. Anson put his hand flat on the bench and counted to 8 for no reason his body would confess. "Tell me if you want me not to read the other notes," he said. The kind of friend a person needs in rooms where both mystery and bureaucracy show up at the same table. "Read," she said. "We're already here." The note in the 1999 box was from Rosen and felt like laughter on a porch when the pots are already washed. "The house we put ourselves in is not one the county believes holds blood," she wrote. "But it holds me. And it holds the keys. If you need a name, the river has one. If you need a door, the shed does." In the box from 2008, a different hand, shakier, it read, "I kept the lights in the gate, all through the storms. I think sometimes we are simply the people who keep lights. If you are mine, you will know when to turn one on." In the box from 2014 was a letter from the sexton whose face smiled off the oval on the stone. She wrote like a woman who had lived by the kind of lists that get family through winter. I have no children of my own except the Gates, she wrote. But I have a niece, whether the paper says it or not. I kept her not by being in the room, but by owning my stubbornness. If she stands over me with a phone and hears me, she will take what she needs and leave what she should, and I will go on counting with my hands in dirt like I like to do. They left the boxes as they'd found them, shifted nothing but air. August closed the locker with a satisfaction that felt like lining up the edges on a stack of bills and smoothing them down. He did not ask for anyone's story. He had one of his own, built of this place, and the line of names he keeps with the quiet grace of a man who waters plants. By the time they stepped back into the paths, the light had hunched into evening. The river sounded less like sheet music and more like a phrase repeating. The map on her phone had stopped suggesting anything and gone back to pretending it was an obedient device. The air smelled like river, camellia, and a penny someone had worried in a good pocket for a decade. Anson asked if she wanted to go to the step bridge. She said no, in a voice that held both sorrow and a plan. Tomorrow, in daylight, when names sit on surfaces more politely. He agreed because this is what friendship is, a committee about timing. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with the ledger borrowed under August's nod and the locket under her thumb. She called her mother. The call rolled twice, and then the voice she knew and loved and sometimes resented filled the line with wind and caution. They made small talk for 30 seconds, and then they moved somewhere they had not walked together. Ma, she said, who was Rosen? Who was Idony before me? Silence, sincere. A kettle somewhere in the house. The refrigerator willing itself to be steady. Finally, her mother sighed, and the sigh sounded like a drawer allowed to close after being held open too many years. My aunt, she said, not by blood, by the kind of line people draw when the law does not help. She and the other one, the sexton, kept me safe when I was little and didn't know that my father wasn't safe to be around. They ran the lights in the cemetery and in the loose latch doors and told me when to lock things and when to open them. They were more my aunts than any of the few relatives that share me. When I left everything. I thought that was how you survive. I have not told you the parts you asked me about because I thought you'd want something tidier than I had, and because I am silly enough to think if I did not say the names, the ache would go to sleep. She told a story of a girl who sat on a stoop counting keys while two women kept a town's small doors in working order, literal and figurative. She told how those women had taught her to move through rooms with respect and to leave envelopes where they'd be needed. She did not speak tenderly about the man who invented the silence she had carried. She spoke tenderly about the other men, the ones who changed locks without asking why, and taught a child where the ladders were kept for days when rain insisted. I should have told you, her mother said finally, soft with the fatigue of a woman who has not confessed a simple truth for a long time. You have two names. The one I gave you, and the one the other women left for you to find when you were ready. You belong to both. You belong to yourself most. They went to the step bridge the next day. It was out by the old waterworks, just as the margin note had said. The county had let Weeds try to become the principal of the place, and the Weeds had accepted the assignment with poor posture and pride. The bridge stood, red paint scabbed into beauty, water under it moving with the impatient streams have when the river bullies them with schedule. In the middle beam, behind a square of metal the size of a book, a hollowed space. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, a ring of keys on a chain that had learned 3 hands. Each key had a number, 10, 12, 14. The fob matched the tags in the box. Beside the keys lay a square of paper with a tiny handprint in paint the color of that old camellia behind the office. A child had been here once. She had pressed her hand down. Someone had saved it for a woman who would put her hand down later and understand they did not take the keys. She set her palm over the handprint. The sizes did not match. The feeling did. She closed the plate. She and Anson walked back to the car with the sun finding their shoulders and the hum of insects writing their own accurate dissertations on persistence. Back at the cemetery, she returned the ledger. August nodded like a man at the end of a good piece of work. She walked to the first stone and put 2 fingers on the glazed oval where the sexton's face had learned to look past tourists to the river. She did not speak. She let the ground and the river carry whatever needed moving. Her phone did not ping again there. It would ping months later, once in a grocery store aisle in a different city, when an older woman in a Union jacket looked at her and tilted her head in a way that meant keys are a language. It would ping once again when she held the hand of a friend through a night much too long and heard as clearly as weather a voice say, "Lift and turn." It would ping at odd hours for the next several years when doors asked to be locked or opened with care. Sometimes it would be an app acting like a person, sometimes it would be a person acting like a map. Sometimes it would be a name arriving in a room with good manners and old roots. If you want the tidy ending, it is this. She wrote to the memorial company to ask who had access to the airdrop at the stone. No one answered in a way that satisfied anyone who cares about permissions. She kept the photo of the sexton in her wallet behind the museum badge and found that having a face like that near your ID keeps you from forgetting where the door to the stairwell is in a fire. She learned to count gates with her hands, the way women in that county had since the first lock learned the first habit. She took pies to August's workbench and listened to his stories. She phoned her mother on Sundays and let the conversation go long enough to find the sentence that mattered each week. She carried with her the sentence from the Oval's page. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. If you want the less tidy truth, it is this. Sometimes your life is a geofence you didn't set. Sometimes you arrive at your own name carved in stone, and the stone says, "Welcome." Sometimes you are the niece of women who bent keys into new jobs and called that bending prayer. Sometimes your phone pings at a grave, and the ping is only a device doing what it was taught, and sometimes it is a noise a river makes when it is trying to talk through everyone's machines at once. If this happens to you, if you walk under trees that have learned the art of holding up clouds, and a little bell sounds in your pocket, and your name appears as a place, don't panic. Stand where you are. Read the dates out loud so the year will stop pretending it is only a number. Touch the stone with 2 fingers, not more. Listen for the voice that sounds like someone who knows where the ladders are kept. If a key is offered, lift and turn. If a door sticks, lift and turn. If a person asks for a niece, say the word niece like a new tool you know how to use. And when you leave, take the long path that wanders near the bluff. The river will be there keeping count. The oaks will be there practicing their patient grammar. Your phone will settle back into behaving. The ground will remember you, not because you are special, but because that is what ground does for people who treat it like a partner. Somewhere behind you, a bell on a worker's desk will ring, and a man named August will nod to no one and say out loud into an empty shed, "She arrived." Then he will sweep the floor in slow, exact strokes, as if he were writing the names in dust and erasing them on purpose so the day could begin again and mean it. The dorm room that kept getting warmer every night. The first night she noticed it, the heat felt like a mistake rather than a message. Early September in Ohio, a Sunday that leaned into Monday, the kind of campus night when cicadas buzz like old streetlights and the dorm's brick walls hold the afternoon sun just long enough to be nostalgic. Isolde Marin unrolled a thrifted rug that smelled faintly of cedar, set 2 plants on the windowsill like green punctuation, and lay back on the narrow bed under the hum of a fan that tried hard and failed. Sutter Hall, room 412, 4th floor, end of the hall. The radiator beneath the window ticked its polite little ticks. Her phone read 78 inside, while the weather app swore 68 outside. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2018. Move-in had been a week of book stacks, cardboard cuts, and names learned in bursts that evaporated by dinner. Isolde's major was urban studies with a minor in printmaking because maps and ink made sense even when people did not. Her roommate, a sophomore transfer named Mairead Klein, arrived with a battered cello case and the posture of someone who had done 3 summers of lifeguarding and was still listening for whistles. Their RA, Bram Delaney, wore a lanyard like a badge and kindness like a habit. The floor smelled like laundry pods and slice and bake cookies. The building smelled like every Midwestern dorm built in the 1970s, a blend of cinder block, old varnish, and the ghost of burnt popcorn. That first night, Isolde pushed the window up 2 inches. The sash stuck, then relented with a groan that sounded like the word careful. She fell asleep to a parking lot lullaby and woke at 2:19 with her neck damp. The fan had not changed. The room had. The little thermometer clipped to her backpack strap said 81. She turned the fan higher. The blades shouted their small capacity. She kicked the blanket down and slept again like a person auditioning for rest. Monday, the heat drifted earlier, 10:47. A wave across her ankles first, then knees, then a slow embrace that felt like a crowded bus in July. She checked the radiator. Cold metal. She put her palm on the cinder block, on the window glass, on the closet door. Nothing from those shapes admitted guilt. Mairead returned from orchestra and set the cello gently on the desk chair. She stood still, chin tilted, the way musicians listen to rooms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "It keeps getting warmer after midnight," Isolde said. "The building probably overcorrects. Day cools down, system lags, night gets weird." Mairead nodded. "I fell asleep during rehearsal last winter in a practice room. Woke drenched. Found out the steam had backfed into a silent radiator. You could hear it in the walls if you pressed your ear." They both pressed their ears to the dorm wall. The cinder block offered a polite shush, the way libraries used to. No steam, no hiss, just the slow drum of a building's heart. By Wednesday, the room was a decision the night kept making. 83 by 1 a.m., 85 by 3. Isolde checked the hallway, cool enough to be a relief. She checked the stairwell, cooler still. In the common room, a girl wearing a sweatshirt that said "Ecology means everything" had her feet tucked under her and a textbook open like a tent. She looked up. "Your floor hot too." "Only ours," Isolde said. "Or only me. Or only when I try to sleep." They laughed because college teaches you to treat weirdness like weather. You comment, you adapt, you set one more fan on the windowsill and call it a life. Thursday brought a storm that argued with the city for hours. A late summer brawl of heat and lightning. The power hiccuped and then recovered. The building hummed. At 2 a.m., the room hung heavy. Isolde slid out of bed, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the screen, as if the night owed her an apology. Far below, a maintenance cart whispered along the service road. She saw the driver's hat and his careful hands. She did not see the face. She told herself the heat felt personal only because you cannot argue with a building and win. By Saturday, the temperature games had found a schedule. 9:58, a nudge. 11:30, a hand on the small of the back. 1:12, the sensation of standing too close to an open oven. Isolde began to time her showers like a boxer timing breath. She tried sleeping on the cool tile of the little bathroom. She tried damp cloths on wrists and ankles. She tried a sliver of ice in a hand towel held to her throat. She tried pretending it was fine. She told no one at home because her mother would only worry and send articles about heat stroke, and her father would suggest a hardware store trip that distance made irrelevant. Sunday night, Mairead woke first. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, said a word that sounded like, "What is this?" and went to the window. The sash had dropped the last inch by itself at some point in the night, closing with that old house suction that makes a soft kiss. She lifted it again, hot air breathed in, not outdoor hot. Not the honest humidity of a Midwest night, different, like the air that escapes when you open a dryer in a laundromat and forget to step back. "We call maintenance in the morning," Mairead said. "We tell them we have an invisible sauna. We use likable voices and the phrase safety concern." Monday morning, Bram came with a clipboard and his likable voice. He listened earnestly, took the temperature with a cheap tool that blinked numbers nobody trusted, wrote down 86, and then underlined it as if underlining were a wrench. He called facilities. They promised someone by afternoon. The someone arrived at 4:19, late enough to be human, early enough to look like hope. His name, Patch read, Gentry. He was the kind of person who stands in a room like it has a puzzle only he can solve, and then smiles when the puzzle turns out to be harder. He checked the radiator, the thermostat no one had noticed in the corner with its tiny slider, the vent slits high near the ceiling that made the room look like it could breathe if it wanted to. "Steam off," he said. "Air handler off. You got a ghost heater." He grinned to make sure they understood he meant the phrase and not the ghost. But he knocked on the radiator anyway, knuckles to iron. the way some people knock on wood when they do not believe in luck and practice it just in case. He opened the closet and frowned. "Do you mind?" he asked, and shifted their shoes to one side. Behind the shoe rack, a square of plywood patched a hole in the wall. Screws, paint over paint. He crouched, fit a screwdriver into a head, and worked it loose. When the panel came away, a breath of air came with it. Warm, the kind of warm air that has been waiting its turn. "Old Chase," he said. "Big one. They used to run steam risers along these shafts in the 70s. Maybe a repair, maybe somebody capped something and forgot to ask the night to forgive them." He put his hand into the dark space and paused. He was not afraid. He was listening. Hear that. They leaned closer. At first, only quiet, then a small sound. Not a hiss, not a vapor whisper. A tick. Regular, patient. Like a metronome a long room away. Gentry nodded. Thermal something. Or a tenant below you added a pet space heater that thinks it owns the building. "I'll trace the chase. I'll talk to the engineers." He put the panel back gently and made a note on his worksheet with a pencil that had been sharpened to the earnest point of a person who still respects graphite. "I will try to fix the physics. In the meantime, get a bigger fan." He winked to soften the fact that bigger fans often just make bigger noise. They bought another fan anyway. They bought clips to hold the window higher. They bought ice in the deli and wrapped it in a towel like a patient. Still, Knight insisted. Isolde began keeping a notebook. It was a habit from a summer job shelving returns. Titles, times, temperatures. Notes that sounded like weather reports written by a poet with a bad sense of humor. The dorm ate the cool at 118. The bed felt like a cast iron pan that had forgotten it was retired. I dreamed of a field on fire with no flame. She started staying up with the heat to see if it would reveal its reason. She did readings in the hall where the air felt borderline normal. She ate popsicles and pretended it was study fuel. She took walks at 2 and saw the campus under its other mask. A place of slow bikes and glowing vending machines, and a custodian humming while polishing a floor into a lake. Once she saw Gentry in the stairwell, descending from 5 with a coil of flexible duct over his shoulder like a silver python that had agreed to be helpful. He nodded and lifted one hand without letting the duct slip. "Sleep," he said in the tone of a wish. By the 3rd week, a rumor floated into their floor group chat. Sutter Hall used to be a summer dorm for high school programs and band camps. The heat was leftover rehearsal energy. Someone else wrote that an electrical fire in 1979 had bruised the 4th floor and the building was still shy about it. A person named Quillen in 409 posted a link to an archive student newspaper with a grainy photo of firefighters carrying a hose through a stairwell that looked exactly like theirs. Headline: Minor fire, major evacuation, no injuries, cause unknown. Mairead, who believed in research the way some people believe in saint candles, went to the library's basement where old newsprint lives. She returned with photocopies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The story was sparse. Smoke at 3:03, alarms, students in bathrobes on the lawn, the heat source somewhere inside a wall where a maintenance chase ran, repairs by October, reopening with new paint and the same old radiators. She spread the pages on the desk like cards. "There," she said softly, pointing to a little box at the margin. "Letter to the editor. Student writes that the heat on 4 was getting worse each night before the fire. RA told them to open windows and hydrate. Facilities said everything within normal range. The days were normal. The nights turned the rooms into ovens." Isolde looked from the paper to the cinder block. Sometimes a run of text looks like a hallway and you want to walk down it with a flashlight. She hit the building's history page on the university site. Donors. Dedications. A black and white photo of a ribbon. Nothing about the night warmth that arrived like someone else's breath. At 1:27, the room grew heavy again. As if their research had rung a bell the building had been waiting to hear. The fan jammed the window open, but the heat came anyway. The little thermometer blinked 88 and then surrendered to the idea that numbers, like sleep, sometimes lose track of themselves. Isolde slept badly and woke with a headache that tasted like pennies. On her desk, the notebook sat open to an entry she did not remember writing. The letters were tidy, her handwriting when she tried to look like someone else. She read the line twice, then 3 times. It said, "Open the panel," and the period at the end looked like a door. She waited until afternoon. Gentry had promised to come back sometime, and sometime often arrives when a person steps away for 5 minutes. At 4 o'clock, with the building's light turned down to that late summer amber, she moved the shoe rack again and unscrewed the panel. The dark behind it was not night, exactly. More like the idea of a hallway after the last person has left and turned the lights off out of habit. She lifted her phone flashlight and aimed it into the chase. Dust motes performed private theater. A vertical shaft, maybe 2 feet across, ran up and down like a secret elevator. Patches where pipes had once been. Scars where brackets had caught things. And there, almost directly under the bottom edge of the opening, a flat ledge of old wood with something resting on it. Isolde reached in with care, as if the dark could be brittle. Her fingers found the object's corner. Cardboard. The top felt soft, the way paper does when it has been damp and then forced to pretend it never was. She drew it out. A small box that had once been white and now had become a kind of museum beige. On the lid, written in a hand that pressed too light, a word like a name, Juniper. She set the box on the rug and did not open it. She waited, and the waiting gave her permission to continue. Inside, a stack of index cards tied with string, a folded note, a key on a blue ribbon, narrow as a promise. The note began with, "Dear whoever found this," and continued with the kind of sentences people write when they have been waiting to tell something to a person who will understand. The year at the top of the page read 1979. The signature at the bottom read, "Juniper Vale, Room 4, 16, Sutter Hall." The handwriting leaned to the right, steady as a person who prefers walking to running. "I do not know if I will be believed," it said. "So I am writing this as plainly as I can. Our room is getting warmer each night. The thermometer in our snake plant reads 87 at 3 in the morning. Nobody believes a snake plant. My roommate thinks I am being dramatic. I asked the RA. He said it is just late summer in Ohio. It is not. The heat comes after midnight. It leaves at dawn. The radiator is cold. The vent does not blow. The closet smells like hot iron. I hear ticking in the wall. We are on 4. If you are reading this, maybe you have it too." Isolde felt her own breath echo back from the paragraph. She looked up at the closet door, then at the open chase, as if the words might have leaked. Juniper's note went on, "I work at the cafeteria breakfast shift. I am awake when others are asleep. The heat is a person to me now. It arrives at a time, it stays, it goes. I tried to leave the window open and the sash slid down. I propped it with a book, the book fell, then the window closed by itself. I am not saying a ghost. I am saying something else has a habit here. In case this is useful to you, I am also leaving these." Inside the library's bound journals, someone wrote about a fire on this floor long ago, and then someone else took the page out. I copied what I could before they did. The key is to a storage cabinet in the basement of this building. There are boxes there the staff say are theirs. The key works for the green cabinet that has a dent like a fist. I did not take anything because I got scared. Maybe you will not be. If no one else believes you, I do. I believe you enough to hide this where the building keeps its secrets. If I am wrong, throw this away. If I am right, find what the staff do not talk about. Do not forget to sleep. That is where your spine remembers its job. Mairead came in from rehearsal and stopped when she saw the open panel, the box, the pages laid like a small altar. She sank to the floor and read with both hands pressed flat against the rug as if to steady the words. "We have to find the cabinet," she said, voice quiet like church. "We have to ask Bram to not ask questions." Bram did ask questions because that is also the RA's job. When he saw the note and the box and the panel, he bent his head. He was not a superstitious person, only a person who had worked 3 summers as a camp counselor and learned that buildings hold mood the way lakes hold wind. "I can get you into the basement," he said. "I will walk away from the door and hum loudly so that if anyone asks me what I was doing, I can say I was humming. You will be fast." The basement under Sutter was everything a basement should be. Cool as forgiveness, damp as a memory kept by concrete. The hall shone a soft yellow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Green cabinets lined one wall. The third from the end had a dent like a fist. The key ribbon was blue. The lock turned. Inside, cardboard boxes labeled with dates and short phrases. Stack of work orders, Steam archive, fire log, staff do not remove. The handwriting on the labels was neat and stern. Mairead reached up and slid one down. The bottom sagged ominously. They set it on the floor. Inside, manila folders swollen with damp and years. Isolde opened one and pulled a sheet carefully so it would not split. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 416. Unusual heat after midnight. Radiator cold. Closet warm. Check chase, check riser. She set it aside and pulled another. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 412. Student reports late heat, not present daytime. Housekeeping notes window sash malfunctioning. Recommend maintenance weld stop. Isolde looked up. Weld stop. She imagined a person 40 years earlier thinking a sliding sash a nuisance and telling someone to make it tame. Another folder. Fire log, September. Smell of hot iron. Call at 3-3. Response within 3 minutes. Source uncertain. Damage limited to inside of chase between 412 and 416. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: cap steam riser permanently at basement and roof. Service ticket created. The paper clipped to the recommendation was a receipt for parts and a penciled note reading, done. A second note added another sentence in a different hand. Night crew reports residual heat persists. Monitor. Mairead pressed her palm over her own heart. This is the story of every building that tries to forget. The parts get fixed, the habit stays. They took photos with their phones like archivists on a deadline. They replaced the folders in the box with the care of people dressing a child who was finally asleep. They locked the cabinet. Bram hummed. The hallway air kept its cool. Back upstairs, they sat with the panel open and the note on the rug, and the cooling afternoon creeping through the window like a kind visitor. Isolde's notebook waited with its white page. She wrote, Juniper, thank you. She did not know where to put the sentence, so she put it on the first line under the date so it would be the thing the day had to carry. At 1:28, the heat returned. It did not surge. It arrived politely, like a person who has been taught to knock. Isolde sat on the floor beside the open chase and placed her hand just inside without touching any side. The air felt warmer than the room, as if the chase were a throat exhaling a breath it had saved. What do you want? She said aloud, not because she thought the building would answer, but because sometimes the voice knows which door truth stands behind. The tick came again, regular, small. Isolde counted between ticks. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. The rhythm made a shape in her mind, not a clock, a valve. A thing that opens and then holds. A thing that believes in intervals. She looked at the radiator. At the elbow joint where the old pipe met the shutoff wheel, a tiny telltale stain had crept along the seam, brown and precise. She leaned closer. Warm, not hot. Warm like a wrist. Gentry returned the next day with a partner whose name patch read Tova. They listened, as technicians do when the room is allowed to make its case. Isolde showed them the cabinet photos. Tova's lips kept a straight line while her eyebrows confessed their feelings. They pulled the panel and shone better light. They found the old riser, capped, cool. They found a newer run of conduit laid up the side at some later date, carrying wires, not heat. They found insulation collapsed onto itself like old cake. They found nothing that pointed to a flame or a hiss. Tova ran a thermal camera along the cinder block. The screen glowed in false color. A vertical stripe warmer than its neighbors lay behind the closet and the head of the bed. Not red, not danger, yellow shading into orange. Residual, Gentry said, could be heat migrating from a lower source, could be a hot water loop bringing showers to the floor below with more enthusiasm than planned. But the loop below doesn't run at 3 in the morning, Tova said. She had the nap schedule of the building memorized. She pointed to the thermal stripe. This is a habit. They scheduled a shutdown for the following night, midnight to 4. The building would sigh and then sleep while they opened valves, and listened for the kind of silence that tells the truth. Bram knocked on doors and posted signs. The girls in Ecology Means Everything, Sweats, groaned about showers and then agreed. The fourth floor exhaled in a collective okay. At 12:12, the pump slowed. The fan in 412 made its small, brave wind. The window held at 3 inches with 2 clips like a pair of loyal hands. At 1:27, the room still warmed. Not as high, not as fast, but enough to say, I am here. Isolde sat on the rug and pressed her shoulder to the closet wall. She closed her eyes so hearing could be her only job. She heard the tick, she heard Myreed's breath even. She heard, outside, a late skateboard roll between classes like a drum. And she heard, very faint and not from the chase at all, a tone. Not a pipe, not a fan, not foreseeable. A note, caught and held. Then gone. She opened her eyes. Mairead was looking at her with a musician's gaze. You heard it too. What is it? Isolde asked. A harmonic. The kind you get when a sympathetic thing vibrates because its friend is nearby. She touched the cello case. Instruments do it, rooms do it, bodies do it when they are convinced. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, lifted a glass of water, and set it on the radiator. The surface quivered. A ripple. A second one. The pattern of the tick. Mairead tuned by memory and sang a single, low pitch, almost under her breath. A hum that could have been mistaken for a thought. The glass shivered. The tick in the wall danced out of step, then found her beat, then stilled as if listening, then returned. What if, she said quietly, all this is sound pretending to be heat? Isolde did not laugh. She had learned the month prior that grief can pretend to be a quiz grade and hunger can pretend to be impatience. Why not sound pretending to be heat? She ran her palm along the cinder block, then placed it flat and left it. A warmth answered. The next day was October 1st. Campus wore flannel and pretended it had always loved cinnamon. Facilities sent an email with the subject line Steam Update that promised further investigation and patience. The fourth floor shared a thread of remedies and rituals. Bowls of ice, mist bottles, wet socks trick, floor naps. No one suggested sage. Someone suggested prayer with a grin that did not deny its usefulness. That night, the heat arrived like a smaller animal. 81, 82, a steady hold at 83. Manageable if you learned how. Isolde placed the glass on the radiator again, turned off the fans, and waited for quiet to settle where it belongs. Mairead sang once, twice, and stopped. The glass's ripples slowed. The tick shifted to the far side of the closet. A draft found her ankles like a cat checking for attention. The room listened back. They made it through October with methods that would have looked ridiculous out of context and were ordinary inside it. They slept with wet towels folded like scarves. They studied in the hall and accepted that their room had been reclassified as a place you prepared to enter rather than a place you lived. They kept the panel off. They learned to say thank you to cool mornings and to say aloud the promise to return before night put its hand on the doorknob. One evening, after a storm blew leaves against the window like letters trying to enter, Bram knocked and leaned in. Facilities found something, he said. You want to come see? The invitation sounded like a friend offering to show you where a magic trick hides its thread. In the basement, Tova stood beside the building's old heart, piping like veins, valves like knuckles, tags tied with string, naming parts from an era that believed names mattered. She pointed to a run that disappeared into the wall beneath, where 412 would stand above them. Here, a capped branch, not steam, an old electrical conduit bypassed years ago. It sits next to a hot water loop. When the loop runs heavy during evening showers, it warms the conduit and then the chase. The chase carries that warmth upward. At night, when the loop cycles to keep the building from feeling abandoned, the warmth lingers. The panel in your closet became the mouth of it. A small chimney with no smoke. Gentry tapped the conduit with his knuckle. You could call it physics, you could also call it habit. Either is the right answer. They installed insulation around the conduit. They added an air brake in the chase so warmth would stop treating the wall like a ladder. They replaced the window's stiff cords so the sash would consent to stay where a human asked it to stay. They promised it would help. They did not promise everything. It helped. The nights cooled to numbers that looked like decimals instead of pronouncements. 77. 76, when the wind took an interest. Isolde slept without wet towels. She still woke at 1:27 once, for no reason except the body's loyalty to former alarms. She lay there and listened. The room made its old house noises. Outside, snow rehearsed far away and then gave up. She fell asleep, mouthing the word juniper the way a person mouths the name of a bus stop, to remember where to get off next time. November brought a letter. Real paper, wiggle of ink, the return address, for a dorm across campus, Reed Hall. Inside, 2 sentences in a tidy hand. I found your note in the basement box when Bram fetched more tape for door decorations. My aunt's name was Juniper Vale. She lived in Sutter in 1979. I have a photo of her in front of a radiator holding a cup of tea and laughing like the tea was a joke. Thank you for believing her. Signed, Quillen Vale, room 305. Isolde wrote back. She wrote about the cabinet and the boxes and the way the building had tried to forget. Quillen wrote again with a copy of the photo. Juniper looked like someone who would hide a note and trust the future. Hair gathered in a bandana, eyes practicing mischief. The radiator behind her, upright as a soldier that had decided to sit. Finals arrived like weather that had been announced for weeks and still surprised everyone. Mairead spent long hours in the practice rooms, bow rising and falling like a small boat riding out a swell. Isolde finished a printmaking project of 14 little maps of Sutter Hall. She gave the stairwells names. She drew the 4th floor twice, once by day, once by night. She printed in blue and rust. She added a tiny red dot where their closet panel sat like a secret door. She titled the piece, Heat Rises, Then Cool Heads. On the last night before winter break, they propped the door open and played a playlist of songs that sounded like leaving without saying goodbye. Their neighbors drifted in. Cups of cocoa. A plate of cookies that looked store-bought and tasted like grief in the shape of sugar. Someone told a story about a chessboard left in a laundry room that always had one piece moved between midnight and dawn. Someone else told a story about a campus fountain that ran warm all winter like a stubborn rumor. They laughed easily because relief had come. Before midnight, Bram stood in the doorway with his clipboard and a tired smile and said, "Thank you for not setting anything on fire this semester," which is a low bar that feels high after October. Isolde slept early and woke with the feeling of being watched in a kind way. She rolled over and looked at the open panel. The chase breathed a soft, neutral air. She whispered the habit of her thanks the way some people say grace. For the cool, for the note, for the way buildings hold hands with the people who listen. In January, when the term began again and the air cut like paper, the room behaved. The radiator learned its job when asked. The night stopped bringing heat like a dare. The panel stayed off anyway. They left it open not because they liked the view of a dark shaft, but because some doors, once discovered, should not be forced to forget they can open. One night in late February, when snow made a tidy line along the windowsill and the hall smelled like wool and wet boots, Mairead tuned and held a low note the way a person can hold a breath when they want the person across from them to finish their thought. The glass on the radiator did not ripple, the tick did not come. She let the note go, she smiled. Habit broken, she said, and then added, or perhaps trained. Spring came in fits of joy and apology. Sutter Hall turned quiet, then loud, then quiet again. Finals chalked the sidewalks with equations and wishes. On the last afternoon before move-out, Gentry and Tova came by with a work order that did not need signatures. "We are capping the chase permanently," Tova said. "Not the kind of permanent that forgets. The kind that leaves a note for the next person." Gentry nodded at the open panel. "Leave it if you want, we're not offended." He tapped the cinder block once with his knuckle and said, "Thanks for telling us. We need buildings to snitch on us. Otherwise, we fix the wrong things." They closed their boxes. They took the plants off the sill. They rolled the rug into a new shape. Bram signed their checkout forms with a flourish. In the hall, Isolde taped one last paper to the wall at eye level between 412 and 416. Not a manifesto, not a myth, a map. She had printed 2 copies. The little red dot, the words, If your room gets warmer every night, you are not dramatic and you are not alone. The panel in the closet is held by 4 screws. Please listen for the tick. Please go to the basement cabinet with the green dent. And please, sleep. Your spine remembers its job when you do. She signed it tiny, just initials, because the story did not belong to her alone. Years later, when she would sleep in cities with windows that sealed shut and air that arrived by command, she would sometimes wake at 1:27 and rest her palm against the wall. Habit, memory, a check-in with the building around her. She would feel the honest cool of drywall. She would hear the thrum of someone's TV 3 floors down, or a neighbor's late laugh, and think, heat pretended to be sound, then sound pretended to be heat, and we learned to name what was ours to name. If you are listening to this, and your room keeps getting warmer every night, put your hand on the wall. Count between the ticks if you hear them. Call the person with the name Patch and the quiet eyes. Ask them to look for the habit behind the system. And if you find a note in a chase, write your own, then leave the panel open long enough for the room to remember it can breathe. The night will arrive either way. It is better when it finds you ready, with a glass of water on the radiator and a song in your pocket that knows how to lay its hand gently on the room and say, "We hear you, we're staying. We're going to keep you company until morning cools the world back into something we can bear."